right, well, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Just since everyone will still be joining, I'm sure, little by little, but I don't want to monopolize anything. So hello, everyone. Welcome to day one of Forum. We're really excited to have you all here. Welcome to the filmmakers, to anyone joining us internationally or in the US or in Palm Springs itself. We're really excited to host you in this first hybrid edition the festival and a forum. My name is Anna Souza. I'm the forum producer. I also have Harrison Harvey, our forum coordinator, here with us. We're both on staff and really excited to welcome you. We've got a whole week of panels and roundtables and conversations planned for you. So please check the schedule. You can register right up until events start to happen. So please feel free to register for events if you haven't already, but you're still interested in joining. That's totally still possible. We are going to, for this first panel, Finessing Your Festival Strategy, we're really excited to have Ritesh Mehta, who's a senior programmer at the Indian Film Festival of LA, and he's also been part of the programming team at AFI Fest, at Outfest, and at LAGFF. So I don't want to take up too much time. I want to kick it right off and hand it over to Ritesh. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Harrison, for organizing this. And I'm very excited to be here and moderating my first panel at Palm Springs. So that's exciting. I love this festival. I visited in 2018, and I have nice memories of the desert, interesting adventurous memories, if you can talk about it at another time. But this is wonderful, and I'm very excited to, just talk about film festival strategy and finessing a strategy. I think the way I look at today's panel is, to help filmmakers understand not just about specific festivals, but from since most of everyone here right now has a lot of programming experience from a programmer standpoint, what is it like for filmmakers to plan a holistic festival strategy, and what the other kind of complicating factors that come into play, especially that now we're firmly in a world of virtual and hybrid festivals, and also in a world where there's also many short film streaming platforms that filmmakers have choices for. So I'll just kick it off and ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'd mention my pronouns are he, him, and I would love for everyone to mention their pronouns, and also just talk about your work. But I thought one question to kind of start off and this conversation, keep it open-ended, is what is a favorite festival strategy for a short that you like talking about, or that that would be interesting, like a short that you followed the strategy and that's been interesting to you? Doesn't have to be a success story, it could be just an insightful or illuminating story. So we can start it off with Sheryl.
Ritesh, hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Sheryl Santacruz. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the programming manager at Outfest. I've been working with Outfest for, I think this is going to be either my fifth or sixth festival with them, my festival season with them. So I've been with them a while. Prior to that, I was the programming manager at the Philadelphia Film Festival. And just in general, I've worked at a number of film festivals, including Palm Springs, the feature festival, in hospitality, and kind of other various capacities. So I've definitely lived in the festival world for a long time, not just on the programming end, but and also the planning and the logistics. I also work for the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival as well, but I'm not in the programming sphere at that festival. I'm more in the planning part of it. So favorite, I don't have a specific festival strategy story, but I think I have a category of story that I really enjoy when it comes to hearing about short filmmakers and what they've done at festivals. And my favorite thing to hear is just about the connections that they've made at the festival, and not even specifically, okay, I went to this party and I was networking and I met this industry person. My favorite is the unexpected ones. There was a filmmaker who also acted in his short, and he was at one of the, and after his, he just ran into someone at one of the cocktail parties, and they were talking, and the filmmaker was like, hey, I saw your short and I really like the way you look, and I'm about to go into the desert and shoot a film, and I feel like you would be really great in it. Do you want to just hop in the car and come with us? And so he ended up, I spoke to this filmmaker in the beginning of the festival, and his film played, and then he disappeared. And then I saw him again at the end of the festival. I was like, hey, like, where have you been? I haven't seen you at any of the events. And you said that you were going to do everything. And he was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. So after my film, someone came up to me and asked me to be in their film. And so I did that. So just like weird little stories like that. Outfest Fusion is, I'm sorry, just a little bit about Outfest. We are an LGBTQ film festival in Los Angeles. We have two major festivals. One of them is Outfest Los Angeles, which is about to happen in August. We also have one called Outfest Fusion, which specifically focuses on BIPOC, queer and trans stories. And we just had one in April. And one of the features that played in the virtual Q&A, the director said that she found her actor at Outfest. They both had shorts at the festival, and she saw her on screen and was like, I really like this person. And when she was developing the feature, reached out because she, remembered this person. So for me, the strategy for shorts is not necessarily, you have to reach out to these people and make these connections specifically, but it's more about just being present at the festival and allowing kind of these connections, opening your mind to these different connections that may not be specifically business centric. So yeah, that's, I don't know if there are any other points you wanted me to hit, Ritesh, but.
No, that's great. I just wanted to kind of throw out possible topic areas, and I think relationship building during festivals is so important, and it's almost as important as showing your film and getting your film out to an audience. Bojana.
Oh, thanks, Ritesh. I'm Bojana. I'm the programming director at NewFilmmakers Los Angeles. We're a monthly film festival in LA that usually plays about 15 films every month, typically a couple of shorts programs and one feature. And we're very focused on kind of early to mid-career filmmakers. The majority of our program is shorts, and we're very focused on kind of that pipeline from the festival circuit into kind of industry opportunities. So development representation, kind of people who are at that point in their career where they're looking for that. It's great to be here. I think like my favorite genre of festival strategy story is actually very similar to Sheryl's. And I think it's just like over time we hear these, and these are the ones that we get excited about. But it's always been like filmmakers who met another, it's like usually like a lateral film, like lateral networking that somebody does at a festival where they're coming through, maybe it's their like first genre film, and they're at either like a bigger festival within a genre program. And then they start talking to the other filmmakers in that genre program. And then they hear about what all the best genre festivals are. And they're like, well, I had a list of like these ones, but I don't really know what to go for, or like what to go for first, or which ones are worth it and which ones I should travel to. And then like when they all get together in like the green room before and kind of like workshop that for somebody. And then you hear later like, oh, so-and-so played a festival that this short had played the year before, or they ended up playing this festival together, and you see them like tagged in something like a year down the line where it's like they got into this festival and they're hanging out there and they're like making the connections that they need specifically for that project. Because I think it is so tricky to, to, especially as you're getting into like a new genre or a new area of filmmaking, to start like getting the lay of the land for which festivals are like the best fit for you, because it ultimately is so much about fit, which I know we're going to get into. But I love those stories, and I feel like there's so many of them, and like that genre in general is great. Although the impromptu road trip story is like is pretty awesome. But yeah, I think that was everything that I should cover in this intro.
Awesome, thank you. Amanda?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here on this panel with familiar faces and new faces. So thank you for having me. My name is Amanda Salazar. My pronouns are she and her. I am the head of acquisition and programming at Argo, which is a new streaming platform for short films. And so it will be interesting because I'll be definitely talking from like the end of your cycle and distribution. If you'd like to hear about that, I'm always open to discuss that as a new platform in the space. But I also have programmatic experience. That's what I love to do. So before that, I had been at San Francisco International Film Festival for almost 5 years. I actually still currently have my own film event. I hesitate calling it a film festival because in the way that I think festivals operate, like we don't take submissions. So it's actually like completely curated. It's more of a pop-up cinema for experimental film that takes place once a year in Petaluma. And I'm also a theatrical booker at the Northwest Film Forum in Seattle. And the reason I would even bring that up is that we have 4 festivals that kind of operate outside of within our theater that we put on ourselves as a staff. But then there's also, I guess, when COVID happened, we ended up hosting like over almost 30 festivals this last year, like through our Eventive platform, and have always done partnerships in the Seattle area. And then we've actually recently started a program that we're calling Local Shorties because we have one of our festivals called Local Sightings that specifically features filmmakers either like from or shooting in the Pacific Northwest. And so we're showing short films in front of features, which has been very fun, a dream of mine to do for a long time. So you have to be a local filmmaker to then submit a film under 3 minutes that would then essentially get programmed before a feature. It started in virtual, and we're going to hopefully be moving that into the physical space when we reopen. Oh, and then short films. Like, wait, what I'm supposed to talk about a moment. There are too many. Full disclosure, Bojana and I actually started our careers almost together. We did work together at some point. So I'm sure, Bojana, please let me know if there's a story that comes to mind from our early days in programming. But with that, there are 2 things. I guess I know we're going to speak about strategy, but I do want to like call out that like kind of the wonderful thing about festivals and is the kind of idea that they're all around the world. There is an opportunity to travel. There's an opportunity to meet new people, new audience, connect with new audiences that you never really thought to be in. So it's more of like an anecdotal story that like just speaks to me. And which is we had a film at SF Film it's submitted, it got into our documentary shorts. It was essentially a student film. It was from Kyrgyzstan, and the filmmaker had never like gone outside of the US, and she just arrived in San Francisco, and it was kind of one of those like beautiful moments of her and her friends going around around the city, basically getting to like see the Pacific Ocean for the first time and cross the Golden Gate Bridge, and then also have some wonderful screenings. And that to me is an element, I think, on top of the connections that you make and getting in a car, like all that kind of wonderful, magical moments that happen. But there's also something to be said about that is the like locale and the kind of, literal physicality of the film festivals and where they operate.
That's a great point, and thank you for sharing that all your stories. But yeah, the idea that film festivals are located in a sense, there's a sense of place with film festivals, and with the virtual aspect of it, how much of the sense of place transfers over or is modified is fascinating. But what I enjoyed about all your stories is like the personal element to all your stories, and I think we can talk about like festival strategy, and we will right now. But I think strategy kind of is not something like high-minded or intellectual. It's also kind of micro and personal, and very tailored to your experience and what you're looking for. And I think festivals, good festivals, and the programming teams and the festival hospitality teams are kind of catered to that, to kind of giving you that experience and kind of being aware about what you need from the festivals as well. So I think it's a give and take process for sure. Jumping into just talking about strategy, I think like with ShortFest, there's a mixture of filmmakers in our audience today, and people are calling in from all over the world. So and then there's many early career filmmakers as well. So what does festival strategy look like from your standpoints for early career filmmakers? What should from filmmakers you've spoken to, what does it look like to plan your festival run for your short film? And if you want to kind of touch on financing as well, like that's part of the issue, because one of the things that I keep hearing about is like financial consultants will always say have a budget for festivals in your very first budget when you're making your short film. But obviously, like many short filmmakers don't have that luxury. just need to make their short film. They're not necessarily thinking about festival strategy when they're at that very early process of the germination of stories. So what is your perspective on this? And anyone can answer.
I guess I'll kick us off, everyone. So a big question and perspective on strategy. So, maybe I'll start at the end. And again, please, anyone feel free to chime in, because again, in the nature of collaborative conversation, first and foremost, I definitely understand that short filmmaking, it's a labor of love more often than not, especially in terms of financing and budgeting. But there is an element, and it's been kind of talked about a lot, which is just like making sure to like leave a line in your budget around festivals, if that is the route you want to go. If there are filmmakers here that are like, don't want to do it, I'm putting it up on my Vimeo, this is like what I do, that's also like very, but I think in the terms of this conversation, speaking to that. So, and the reason I say that is like, again, festivals, and I think this is, perfect for like a handoff to, Sheryl or Bojana, which is like, those fees, I know how often they kind of just feel like I'm sending this off into the ether. I don't even know, I get a rejection. There's nothing, to be said, but like those fees do pay for people to screen your film, like trained professionals to screen your film that are spending their time to watch that movie. And you kind of want to create that pipeline, right? That you're having people that are giving the care and attention to the work that your work deserves. So it's just kind of that system kind of is still in place. But I do, and so I would love to hear more from my fellow, comrade, people on this chat about that. But then there's an element I don't want to forget, because this feels like almost two questions, which is around, again, how to, as an emerging filmmaker, especially how to just navigate this space. And it can be so overwhelming. I know there's like, it's just something that there's knowledge that, that is accumulated over time from programming, just because we just get an understanding of the landscape. We have understandings of calendars, of how festivals, actually, how they look and operate. And so to that, because of that overwhelmingness, I often tend to, first of all, like spending that time to research film festivals, and really kind of get a sense of what a yearly calendar looks like. I think I'm a very visual person, so I like that. I like knowing what festivals are in, January, through all the months. And then an event like NewFilmmakers LA, we were like, oh, that's a monthly thing. So that can also get plugged in and kind of really assess in terms of based on location, and then based on like actual what a yearly strategy would be. And then a follow-up to that, because that in itself feels overwhelming, is often thinking about like the themes of your film, thinking about films that are very similar to yours. And I hate, this might come off as like, that festivals only program those same things, and they don't, but there is something to be said of kind of narrowing down that search of like, if you have this certain type of film, whether a certain genre, a certain, like I said, theme or whatnot, and of a film that has been on the circuit 2-3 years prior to that, you can look at the festivals it would played. It's just a really great roadmap. It's a good understanding of like, oh, it just gives, again, I think more context to places where you can, to not feel, quite frankly, overwhelming, right? There's over like 900 festivals just in the US alone. We're not even counting the international market. So I feel like someone else on this call now can chime in to take it from there, because hopefully that was somewhat helpful as a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point about doing your research is really important. I think, as someone who, is kind of on the back end of some of these emails and some of these requests, sometimes it's very apparent that someone just found a list of film festivals and BCC'd everyone, and like letting us know about their film. And Outfest is specifically an LGBTQ film festival, and I don't know how many times I've written back to someone saying, is this an LGBTQ film? Which, like if you're trying to make a case for your film and you don't know who we are, I'm not sure why we would put the effort in to know who you are, because it needs to be a mutual thing. So I think doing your research is really great advice, and also kind of finding a film that is similar in tone or similar in feel, and kind of seeing what their path was is also really great advice in terms of navigating, where you're putting that, your budget, your festival budget. I also think, if you kind of think of it in terms of applying to colleges, you've got your reach schools and you've got your kind of like, okay, like I can, maybe get in, your kind of safeties and, look at that. I think for filmmakers, they kind of see the list of like, here are the top 10, short film festivals or festivals that you want to get your short into. And they're really focused on that. And I don't necessarily think that that is the path that you need to go on in terms of festivals. There have been some films that we have played at Outfest that where we either premiered them or it was like very early in their run, and they ended up either winning an award or just getting buzz, and then ended up playing, like a Sundance. And, usually that is not the route. Usually you play the bigger fest first, and then you that kind of kicks off all of the other festivals hear about you because you played Sundance, and then you go play them. But this was a case, and it's not a common case, where it kind of did a few festivals before, and then that created enough buzz for the bigger festivals to play it. So your festival run can also be long. It doesn't have to just be a calendar year. It can sometimes it takes a little bit for the momentum to kind of build up. And so in terms of navigating that, like it doesn't have to be this very specific route that I think a lot of filmmakers kind of assume that they need to be on. And I will bring it up. Waivers, I know that is if we're talking about your financial strategy, like that is definitely something that will come up. And I will say that obviously it doesn't hurt to ask. But I do think that you shouldn't depend on it. I also, film festivals, most of them are nonprofits, and as such, the staff is lean. And so, I would also say that if you're asking for a waiver and you don't get a response, it also doesn't mean that we're not interested. It just means that we just don't have the capacity to kind of to get through all of those requests in a timely manner. But it is something that there are some festivals who are very hardline about what waivers they will or will not give out, and some do not give out any. And there are others who will depending on the circumstance, give those out. So I would say that when it comes to waivers, it's not something that you should expect. It is something that, again, it doesn't hurt to ask, but I would also say that if you are requesting waivers from festivals, I think you need to be thoughtful in your email. Because again, it is something that we get many requests for those. So I think you should demonstrate that you should keep it short and sweet, because we get a lot of those requests. You should demonstrate that you understand what our festival is and how your film might fit into that ecosystem. Obviously put the link in the body of the email, but if you do get that waiver, again, like make sure you go through the official channels of actually going through the submission process. I think another thing is that just because you know someone at the festival, or maybe there was a personal connection, that's how you got connected to a programmer. Even if they're like, yeah, sure, send me a link, we'll look at it. Also just go through the Film Freeway or whatever submission platform they have, because it's really easy for something that would have been perfect in our lineup to get lost in hundreds of emails. So if you're in the system, we definitely have a system in place to keep track. So I feel like I maybe diverged a little bit from the question, but
No, and I echo all of that and all of what Amanda said. And Sheryl, thank you for such a thoughtful breakdown of waivers and how that works. And yeah, I think just the emphasis that I would put on that is just like anytime you're communicating with a festival, it's like the more tailored it can be, the better. And when we get something, that looks like it was copy pasted and that was for, every festival that you might want to apply to, that's not very compelling. But yeah, if you take time to, really articulate how, whether you're advocating for a film you submitted or you're asking for a waiver, if you take the time to kind of really, in like a fairly short format, describe why you're a good fit for that festival, what kind of individual connection you might have to either that festival's community or, the types of films that that festival has played before, that can be really meaningful. And if you do have somebody who is kind of like going through an inbox of like 100 waiver requests or something, if they do have the time to get their eyes on that, that would be something that stands out to them. But I just also wanted to add that I think, kind of keeping in mind all the things that everybody has already said, I think also thinking about when you start setting out your submission strategy and it's overwhelming and you have a lot to choose from. I think it's really good at the kind of beginning of that process to narrow down what your goals are for that festival run. Which is not to say that other opportunities might not come up as you get into it, and like that's always great, but just to start to kind of make it a little bit more bite-sized for yourself. Think about, is this something where I want to go somewhere to be able to network with a large number of other filmmakers? I really just want to get out there, or I want to meet specific types of industry people, and in what kind of setting? Am I looking for distribution? Am I looking to get development funds to make this short into a feature? And then let that guide your research, because there is good information on festival websites, through like film freeway reviews from other filmmakers, through like Movie Maker Magazine's lists and like other articles about festivals. You can find information about what every festival has its own strength. And just because a festival is great and it serves, XYZ strengths doesn't mean that, the thing that you're looking for is necessarily going to be there. And so narrowing it down more and looking at it that way and having maybe, your top 2 or 3 things that you're going for, and then build from there. And like Amanda said, looking at a calendar so that you can see like, okay, these, this is the first half of the year, or this is like the first season of the year. What do I want to go for? What are my top tier choices using this criteria that fall into that? And then kind of designing your submission schedule that way. And typically the lifespan of a short on the festival circuit is about 2 years, or it can be if you kind of keep riding that wave. And then at that point, I think it gets a little bit too old for most festivals to program, though not everybody. But like have that in mind and then start from there, like make it less overwhelming for yourself by narrowing it down that way. I think that would kind of be my piece of wisdom here. Yeah.
Thanks. These are all great points, and y'all also just thrown out so many more points to discuss that we probably won't get a chance to, because there's like so much to talk about when it comes to like the submissions process. And I definitely want to kind of move on to that next, is kind of like the nitty gritty, like the film freeway of it all. I mean, Sheryl and all of y'all have already brought up some points about waivers, etc. And I definitely know that because I was programming coordinator for IFLA for many years, and I know what it feels like. But also kind of just to reiterate that point about like researching and like knowing festivals, like festivals aren't nameless organizations, they're peopled. And people have roles, so just like know whom you're emailing and what you're asking of them. Is just like my little addition to that. And that's part of your strategy, that's part of your tactics, right? I guess with the film freeway of it all, by film freeway, I just mean submission platforms. I think I receive this question from filmmakers all the time, like, should we write a cover letter, or what should we emphasize? Do programmers even read cover letters? So, I mean, a cover letter is just one example, but like, what are the nitty gritty of the submission process that you think that emerging filmmakers who are still getting their name out there, or maybe people in their first film, what should they be keeping in mind? And there could be many things. So are there a couple of things that are a couple of pet peeves? Maybe that's one way to talk about it.
I can start really quick to just kind of go back to the, tailor it, make it specific to that festival, make it make it specific to how your film fits into that festival. Kind of a lot of what I was talking about in sending even an email to bring your film to the attention of a programmer, a lot of that can go in your cover letter. Personally, a cover letter is not like a make or break for me in any case, but it's always, if somebody is taking the time to write a thoughtful cover letter, it's a nice to have. If it's something that is, very templated and cookie cutter, that's less compelling. But I don't think that there's ever necessarily been anything that has been like a deciding point that's been in a cover letter for me. But it does kind of getting a little, the more you get the backstory of a project or how it came together or why it's important in ways that maybe don't fit into your director's statement, because Film Freeway has that. And I think that serves a lot of that purpose as well. But if there's something outside of that, that can in some cases be a little bit more informal, I think can really help. Sometimes, just pointing out, hey, I've attended your festival, or I've looked at your lineup and I'm familiar with it, just kind of like understanding that somebody, has done their research and has made this submission thoughtfully is good to hear. But again, like it's never been a deciding factor, I think, for me personally in programming. But I don't know, maybe there's some other answers too.
And I'll just quickly add in, not just like, cover letter is one example, but another common question is like, maybe a question people don't think of as often is when should they submit, like, and what are the various deadlines, and do they have any, like, should they wait until the very last minute for the late deadline, or should they submit early for the early deadline? So I would love to get your takes on that as well.
I think submit it as early as you have it is, I think, the prevailing wisdom, and with good reason. Budgetarily, you save money submitting at an earlier deadline. You're also, submitting, before that like last deadline rush, when everybody, there's the people who procrastinated and waited to the last deadline. Then there's the people who are just, finishing their final color correction for that deadline. You're kind of in with everybody who's at that end point. And I think it benefits you in any way. I think the only reason you would want to wait for a later deadline is because you are truly finishing your film in that time, and you want to make it into that festival's submission for this year. That being said, the festival I program for is year round, and so our submissions are always open. And so that is like a different bag altogether. So there kind of like is no hard deadline. Although on Film Freeway, we do have listed deadlines because that's the way that they're structured. And we have in our terms and conditions, always telling everybody like, hey, these deadlines don't correspond to our actual deadlines. You will hear back based on, when you submitted. And still around every deadline, we do get, some people who reach out to us and go, hey, it's past it's past this deadline. Why haven't I heard back? And it was like, it's not an ideal system for us. But at the same time, those deadlines I see do compel people, even if it doesn't correspond to anything in the real world. And what that tells me is like, a deadline tells somebody like, this is when you need to finish it by. But like be thoughtful about your deadlines, especially with festivals that have escalating fees as you get closer to the festival. I think that for your wallet is kind of the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of those things. Same with Outfest, the cover letter. Again, nice to have, not necessary. I don't believe any of us really read them before we dive into the film. If anything, it's something that happens afterwards. So I mean, I would also say that if just when you think about your film too, just don't expect that people will read that before or after, because sometimes we don't read them at all, just depending. Sometimes we watch something and we kind of know exactly how we feel about it, and other times we're like, oh, I wonder if, and then we'll go to the cover letter. So I mean, obviously your film should stand on its own, but it is nice to have that information if we need it. I mean, I think also just in the cover, if you are writing a cover letter, sometimes things like, oh, this was a 90% female, production, things like that. We are kind of in a moment right now where we are, we're not just thinking about the content of the film, but we're also thinking about accessibility, and we're thinking about equity when it comes to the stories we show, who has access to make these films, and how are we creating an environment where we can create more access for underrepresented voices. So, I think one of the things that, again, if you do choose to write a cover letter, if, there are points like that, as a filmmaker were important to you to, as you were crewing up or as you were conceiving of this story, or, that is definitely something that you might want to add. And again, it is not something that is necessary, and it's not something that, it's not like there are boxes that we're ticking off, but it is something that, especially in this moment, is, that's just good for us to know as we move forward. And also, if you are an alumni of the festival, mention that. The same programmers aren't necessarily there 7 years later. And so sometimes we don't know that, oh, wow, this person has had, 5 films at the festival, 10 years ago, had no idea. So, just mentioning things like that, like, oh, I'm actually part of this family already. That's good for us to know. Other kind of things to be aware of. Don't change the password of your film in the middle of the submissions. I mean, just in general, because I know that like your Film Freeway account, you are using it to apply to several different festivals, not just ours. So I would just say that just make sure if you are updating your cut, that's totally fine. Don't, try and keep the same password. I know that sometimes filmmakers will email and say, hey, we've changed the password, here's the new link. But the thing is, many of us and our kind of assistant programmers and our screeners are viewing things through Film Freeway. So if it's not updated in Film Freeway, even though you sent us a separate email, 2 weeks ago, we may not, like whoever's like finally sitting down to watch it may not have that information. And, obviously like we'll figure it out, but it does kind of put a little kink in the process. So just make sure to keep your screener updated. And then, yeah, just to echo, the earlier, the better. Again, not just because of, the cost, it is at a lower price, and usually the early bird, at least at Outfest, our early bird is pretty, the difference in fee between our early bird and our late deadline is pretty drastic. The earlier the better, the earlier that, someone gets eyes on it. I mean, also things that are, that come in later, we're pretty deep into the programming process. We, and again, it's different at other festivals, but we may kind of have like anywhere from, kind of 50, and in some cases, like 80% of like the shorts that we're going to program kind of already tagged. And so yeah, like when it's later, we're obviously, we also have already, at least at Outfest, the way that we program our shorts is, we have them programmed into program themes. Some festivals I know will kind of mark all of the shorts they want to invite, and then after the fact, kind of figure out what categories they go into. But at Outfest, we do a little of that, but we do kind of fit our shorts into specific programs, and we let the submissions speak to us in terms of what kind of programs we have. We have a few programs that we kind of know we have to have every year, but half of our shorts programs are themes that have come through us through the submissions. And I will say that the later you come to us, like kind of the later you become part of that, like the harder it is for you to become a part of that conversation as to like what themes we're starting to lean towards in terms of our programming. So yeah, that's just, another kind of reason that you might want to go earlier rather than later. And yeah, I think just I think the biggest thing for me though is just make sure your screener link and password is updated.
I was going to say I don't really have much to add, except that I will just reiterate, this goes back to our previous thread around research, because I also just want to call it, like, a lot of festivals are different, and I mean, they all are different. Sorry, that was like kind of a anyway, that comment. But the sense of like also how they're structured and how submissions come in and how their committees view films are all handled obviously very internally. And the idea is that what I'm trying to get at is that some festivals, like first of all, always reach out. We're definitely the festivals that I've operated and worked at, and I believe kind of the ones that are here represented, like there are people at the end of that and we'll answer and get back to you in an email. So if you do have a question about when you should submit, they can work with you on it. As I would say that is that I've worked at a festival at SF, for example, where you could submit like for the early deadline and your film wouldn't even be uploaded yet. You just had to upload it within the period of that. And that might not be how other festivals operate. It's just happened to be how we did. So we would get a lot of those questions. So, and we would always, have someone to field them and be like, yes, you could submit now, unknowing that you're going to submit for by maybe the regular deadline, but you don't want to pay that much. So it just depends on the festival. It depends on their capacity. And what I would always just say, like, ask the question. You're the filmmaker, you have the work, and like reach out. There's a contact for you to reach out to on every one of these festivals.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for those answers. We're getting a lot of questions and I'm going to like incorporate and they kind of reflect some of the questions that I had. But in connection to the topic that we're just talking about, how important, one of the questions is, how important is it to have connections at the festivals you're submitting to? And should that overtly inform your strategy?
I would say it's not important, but maybe that's me. In the sense that, I mean, to the earlier point of like Sheryl talking about alumni, there's an avenue in which like, every festival knows their audience, their location, their space. They're creating it in this, like, in their environment. So they know kind of what, from their theaters that they're operating with to their operation, the whole kind of, how it is all put together. And so when it comes to like alumni, if you've played the festival before, there is something there around kind of creating and showing the trajectory of a filmmaker's career. So that, when I think of a connection, is the only one that I feel is like one that I would say, yes, you're an alumni of a festival, but you had to start somewhere. Like you joined that, your film played at that festival as what to that festival was, your first time at some point. And I would, what's really exciting now more than ever is that more people are making short films, more people are making more work. There is not only, it really is about bringing in new emerging voices into the conversation with people that have been working for decades, in their, within the short space as well. And so to me, it's not actually about like having to know someone, and like the fact that, say me personally, I know any of my filmmaking friends that are watching this right now know very clearly they've been rejected by me many times, and it shouldn't operate that way, right? We're watching the work and it needs to stand alone. I do feel like I'm curious for Sheryl and Bojana, you probably feel this too, like we kind of get that question a lot because as the call it like kind of the face often of talking about the festival, it feels like, oh, if I know them, I'll get in, or I'll get that extra bump. And it doesn't operate that way, really, or at least at the festivals that I work at, I'll say that. So from what I know is that it really is kind of about, the work standing alone on its having, where, the film being, when it's going to be played within that environment. And then also you having the ability to, it's great to, if you happen to know the person, but that's not, I would say, a deciding factor in any of the programming rooms I've been in, just because we know you. So I'd say like, it's not actually a factor, but I would love to hear, Bojana and Sheryl too.
Yeah, I mean, the work should stand on its own. And we, at Outfest, we don't, just because someone knows someone doesn't, again, it's not an automatic yes. I think the one thing that you do get when you do know someone is that, someone is literally saying to someone on the programming team, oh, hey, here's this film you should look at. So maybe it goes on a long list of I mean, like, we're looking at everything, but maybe it goes on a list of like, okay, like these are films that like someone has kind of put on our desk. But, in terms of like, once we actually get into it and once we start watching everything and, kind of weighing our options and figuring out the place, like where things can belong, it's in the middle of everything without any sort of, you know what I mean? It is just the film. So, it's not something I wouldn't like, if you are applying to a film that, I mean, a film festival that you're really excited for and really want to play and you don't know anyone, I wouldn't say let that be a deterrent, because it's not. And I also, you know, and don't, just because you don't know anyone or you don't have any connection, you know, again, we're looking at everything with the same, like with the same eyes that we're looking at someone who, you know, again, like we have alumni that have played, that every film has played our festival until they didn't. And, you know, we've, you know, like, so, and, you know, also like the landscape of, you know, like the film and, you know, also just, you know, the perspectives, it changes. You know, it's not important, you know, again, like I think the only thing that you kind of get out of that is that, again, someone is just saying like, oh, hey, like I know someone, here's someone's film, or I know someone who knows someone and they submitted, I just wanted to give you a heads up. But, you know, outside of that, you know, it's in the mix with everything else. And whether you're a, you know, 10-time alum, or whether this is literally the first thing you've ever made in your entire life, it still has the same weight when we kind of go into the programming room and start really making our decisions.
Yeah, no, I definitely echo what you both just said. And also so much of the like programming and screening process is designed to keep our attention on the work. Which is why it's like, yeah, all those extra things that come in afterwards, like the cover letter, all those things, generally you first watch the film and then you go looking for that. And with, you know, assigning reviewers on Film Freeway, they see very little of your submission information aside from like the title and the screening copy, because the point is very much to focus on the work. And especially, you know, for festivals that have been going for a long time, that have tons of alumni and tons of friends and tons of people that they've met, at some point, like that's, I mean, it's lovely to have such a large community, but at the same time, that can't be a deciding factor, because then you're making an exception for everybody and like judging their film differently. What I will say though is the benefit of knowing somebody at a festival is when you are writing that email saying, hey, I submitted and here's the deal with this film, there will be like a familiar face on the other end of it. And I think that we can't discount the human value of that, knowing that you are, you know, at every festival you're writing to a human being, but knowing that the person on the other end of that email is a familiar face, is somebody you've met, you know, somebody you got along with or had a good interaction with. I think there is value in that, and them having that association with you as they're writing back, or, you know, as they're, you know, just aware that you brought something in. Sometimes it can help get, you know, eyes on your film, like maybe a little bit faster, or you're put on, you know, some list somewhere of like, hey, these are notes about certain submissions. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be the work that stands on its own.
Oh, thank you. Those were all super valuable points. There's a bunch of questions from our filmmakers who are watching about the hybrid virtual film landscape, which is a huge topic, and I want to make sure we kind of touch on that. And the questions really are about, do you see this lasting? And the worries are, how can we connect and make valuable connections if a festival's online, or if a festival's hybrid and we can't attend? And the other question I think is also super valid, and it's a question that we definitely got from our filmmakers at the Indian Film Festival last month, is how do we gauge reactions to our films? Because like a lot of the strategy at one festival, like you're visiting, and you know your festival experience at one festival might inform your strategies for other festivals. So how do we gauge audience reactions in an online format? So just to repeat, you can answer any part of these. Do you see this world, the hybrid virtual world, is it like medium term, long term, long lasting, permanent, and about connection making and audience reactions?
I think that as we move back into a more physical space, every festival is kind of thinking about what of the virtual model worked well. I mean, we were all kind of forced to adapt very quickly and to figure something out, and to see how we could, you know, have the strengths of our respective festivals be conveyed in a virtual space. And I think that a lot of people are finding that there are certain things that actually work really well in that space, and especially in terms of accessibility, and being able to, like, for example, you know, this panel, the filmmakers that are in Palm Springs, the filmmakers that are on the other side of the world can all watch it. And there is value in that. And that is something that, you know, because festivals have such a sense of place, I don't think that we thought about as much. I think there were some people that were doing some kind of more hybrid things in the past, but we've all really been kind of forced to think about what that looks like. And for new filmmakers specifically, we've really brought in a lot more kind of like concrete and consistent industry elements into our festival every month that would be harder to coordinate on that scale if everybody needed to be, like filmmakers and industry included, needed to be in the same place at the same time on a day separate from our event day. So we've started doing 2 to 3 virtual panels the Friday before our Saturday monthly events. And we've started doing consistently industry meetings for all of our accepted filmmakers. We'll typically have 6 to 8 meetings that are like just on Zoom with an industry member and all of the accepted filmmakers, and they all get to talk about themselves and introduce their project. They get to hear about what that industry person does and then ask them questions. And they have like an hour and a half long forum just discussing with them. So just like a couple weeks ago, we had some people from development at ABC, some reps from ICM, Verve. We had, people come out, talk to our filmmakers that they requested. So we kind of got the vibe of that group of filmmakers to see, who are you interested in meeting? And they had, some preferences. And so we put that together. And that's an element that we are going to keep virtual as we go forward, because that just works in terms of, travel time. People, somebody can, who's willing to come and talk to emerging filmmakers who has an hour and a half can do that. They don't need to drive to the other side of town and then park and then, make a whole day of it. Like they can really have that conversation and be focused solely on that conversation and none of the other things around it. And so that's been something that's emerged from this for us that I feel like, I don't know if we would have, figured it out in any other way, or maybe we would have eventually, but I think that that's like a piece that's been really like exciting for us to be able to incorporate that we are going to keep. So I think there's going to be varying degrees of that. But I'm curious to see what other people have been kind of like seeing and what your festivals are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of the same. Our festival is in August, Outfest Los Angeles, which is our biggest festival. And we're about to do like a very, hybrid, festival. And so we are figuring out what is that going to look like. And I mean, I think part of it is that, I think this is all, like you said, we've all had to adapt quickly. We're having to readapt to opening up quickly as well. Because it seems that like, June 15th is when things opened up in Los Angeles, and it just feels like all of a sudden everything is completely different than it was the day before. So, I mean, it is this ongoing process where we're kind of having to like forecast or, like predict the future because things can change really drastically in the span of a month and a half, as we've learned. But I think the accessibility to industry that is not physically in that space, I think is really important to us, and also not just in the US, but also internationally. Things like even at Outfest, like trying to put together our juries. It's really hard for us to bring in international industry to partake in our juries, just because that is a prohibitive expense for our festival to bring someone in and then also house them long enough to be able to see all the films and participate in a deliberation. So that is, access to industry is definitely something that we are, going to keep. I think also one of the things, and this is like a little bit of a different spin on it, is that when we are programming shorts, we program them into shorts programs, and we try as much as possible to keep our programs to a nice 90-minute set. It gets a little hard when it starts to get a little too long, and so that impacts the films that we program. If you've got a 30-minute film, you are up against potentially 3 other films that we now cannot include in the program. But when we are on a virtual platform, we have a little bit more kind kind of flexibility with how we program, whether we program things into, shorts programs or whether they stand alone. We have a finite amount of slots to program when we're in person, because renting out a theater and renting out the staff that it goes along with it is really, it's expensive. And so, we've got our, 10 shorts programs, and we can't go over that because we just don't have the actual physical venues. But when you are virtual, you have more freedom you don't have to kind of stick to those parameters. And so that was having that freedom to kind of just be able to program things and not really have to worry so much about the okay, how long is this? And then if we put this in this program, will it make that program too big? And if we put it in another program, well, then now that program is, so all of those things, we don't really have those kinds of restrictions when we're virtual. So that's something that we're trying to, as we're thinking of virtual versus in person, and doing a hybrid of both, how are we able to kind of use the flexibility we have on a virtual platform where the viewing habits are different in a way that really benefits the filmmakers. And then the other thing I will just say about being in person is that, and it's not really a part of this question, but just to say that now that we're going to be in person again, and now that we're going to be in theaters, please make sure that you have DCPs that work. That was something that, last year when everything was virtual, we didn't really have to worry about that. But with shorts specifically, I know it's expensive, but just speaking about the finances of your film, make sure that that is also a line item. If you can't afford to get your DCP professionally made, and if you're just, I know there's a lot of software that you can use to make it on your own, but if you are going to make it on your own, please make sure that you can figure out a way to test it on an actual screen, not just on your computer. We get so many films, DCPs from filmmakers who have just made them on their own. And then when we go to try it in the theater, it doesn't work. It really will benefit you as well. Because I will also say that a lot of theaters don't actually have real projectionists anymore to operate their DCPs. What they have is a theater manager who kind of can press play. And so the troubleshooting on the festival's end is a lot different, because there isn't necessarily, someone who is professionally trained specifically in this thing. So I would also just make sure, just encourage you, please, if you can't get a DCP professionally made, which is fine, if you can figure out a way to get it tested before you send it to a festival. Especially when, when it's a short, there are, hundreds of other shorts that are playing that festival, and they're all, we're doing our best to test everything. But yeah, now that we're back into in-person screenings, we're back to DCPs. So make sure that is part of your strategy as well, because festivals definitely remember, that whole process. It just makes it easier for us, and also it ensures that you have the best quality projection. And if you can't be there, you can at least feel safe knowing that that your festival, that your film works, and that it will project well.
Yeah. Can I chime in? I know we're going to try and wrap up, but I do want to add one comment to this, which is, I don't think I'm going to try and say that I have an answer for what audience engagement is. I don't think any of us have actually really found what that could be and what the replacement for is that for what an in-person true audience, seeing someone watching the film while they're watching it and having that experience. But what I will say that has been brought up is data. And what festivals do have is data. So they have how the film has been screened. They have how many people have screened that film. And these are questions that a filmmaker, you should be asking that festival. Whether or not that festival can or cannot give away that information. So not to put that in a conversation outwards of that, but that's the world we're living in currently, which is about having the power to have that data and know how to operate with that. So you can then see where people are even chiming in from to watch your movie. I think that's an important, and hopefully again, it doesn't take the place for what audience reactions are, but it gives you some kind of context. It gives you something to be Because what used to be, again, you'll be at a screening and then you can go grab coffee with like the people that love your film afterwards. It's like, okay, well, I, have my film playing in LA, but I have this huge audience in Ohio that's watching my movie. Like, okay, like it's more just, it's not the same, it's not replacing it, but it's information. And so I think that that's a key piece of what this hybrid model is going into and what the filmmakers should be pushing and asking the questions of the programming team, like, and the festival on, because that is value to you versus you being like, well, I don't get the in-person now, so what can I be offered? And some festivals are sharing that type of data.
Thanks. I know we're almost at time, but I do want to get one question in about streaming platforms, which is maybe all of y'all can speak to, but I would love to hear Amanda's perspective, since you've been in the world of programming for so many years, and now you're at Argo. Part of the film festival strategy, like now there's so many. It feels like over the pandemic, like so many short film platforms have blossomed, or maybe we're just paying more attention to them right now. Where, like, in terms of like filmmakers paying attention to the festival circuit and also wanting to woo or be wooed by short film platforms and to directly get distribution on them. How does it work, and how should this inform their strategy, depending maybe on whether they're early career filmmakers or mid-career, or pretty much any way you want to answer this question?
Sure, I'll try and wrap it up as briefly as I can. I mean, yes, it's a very exciting time in the digital space. It's also a very encouraging time for filmmakers, right? I think like TikTok is an incredible thing. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's like one of the place where I think there's a lot of authentic voice, like people have real ownership of their stories and what they're doing on these platforms with like stories, Snap, Instagram, all of this. And I say that as like someone who doesn't have a foot in that world. And yet I'm very excited about the creativity that is being kind of fostered there. So with that, it is a combination. Like, again, I think this actually goes back to, we were talking about festival strategy. And I think Bojana, you touched on this, which is like, what do you want? Like, what is it that you're looking for? Yes, everyone, I'm sure everyone here is like, well, I want to make money on my film, like make it back. And the shorts landscape is such that it has not offered a distribution pipeline. And, from Argo's perspective and what we're trying to build is a platform where filmmakers can, earn, there is monetization from a revenue share model and upfront licensing fees. Like every filmmaker gets paid when you're on this platform. It was very much, I was also formerly at Fandor doing acquisitions there, and that was the same model. It was a revenue share model. You came on the platform and you earned money. It's very important just from a mission perspective of the places that I want to align with, because the filmmaker, it's a value, like we should be paying for that work. But that being said, that's not every platform, and every platform operates in different ways. I think Short of the Week is an incredible space that filmmakers can operate within. Vimeo, you having the ownership of just putting it up, especially if like you're a staff pick, what that means in terms of views. There are all types of, there's Vitsy, Almaletto, there's, I can go on. And then we're not even talking about, I would say, the free, what we call like, ad supported spaces, but have commissioned work like your New York Times Op Docs, like your Field of Vision and The Guardian. So it's an exciting time for short work. I think more than ever, festivals aren't as precious, at least for me. It feels about that if a film is online, that it can't. I'm not saying there are still rules in place, and you should know that as a filmmaker too, like, be aware of that. But also know that there are places, even like a Dust and Alter, like this, operated, where you can just submit your work. You can submit your films to Argo and they're going to be seen to be licensed onto the platform. We are a curated service. So I have a programming team that watches all the work, very much like how Bojana and Sheryl have their teams at on the festival setting as well. I feel like I'm perhaps not answering the question, but more just like, I would say it's in some ways, it caused probably its own other panel of just like knowing, I'm sure, questions that are like very directly to like what a strategy look like and how can I actually earn money and all of this. But it really, to me, it comes down to, that type of, if you just want to get your film out and reach as many audiences and make it free. And a lot of that also depends on the story. Like sometimes the people within your film, if it's a documentary, you just want to make sure everyone has access to it, and you should align it. And I would do the same thing, asking those platforms the same questions of like that type of accessibility. What are the audiences that they're reaching? It gets into conversations around exclusivity and non-exclusive. Argo operates on a non-exclusive basis so that your films can be on all other platforms. If you want to do exclusive, we can talk about that. But again, it's I think what's also great about short films and short filmmaking, besides everything else that we've talked about, is more often than not, we're dealing with like the rights holder is the filmmaker. So you're the closest person with that story. You're the closest person, very intimate with the work. And so we get to just be in conversation around it. I'm not often dealing with a distributor that's just trying to sell your film onto the platform. I get to work with you and have that connection, so to speak, that still is like obviously very important even on the festival circuit. I'm trying to wrap that up quickly, so I definitely jumped around.
That was great. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we ask Sheryl and Bojana if you have any responses to anything that Amanda just said about streaming platforms and what you're seeing or hearing from filmmakers about, whether they should be submitting to film festivals and or streaming platforms.
You can go.
I just really have a super quick thing, which is that I think that it's not necessarily like an either or strategy. I think that it very much can be, speaking of hybrid, like I think that those are, that is a hybrid strategy. Those are or two separate strategies working in parallel. And it is just a matter of, as Amanda said, figuring out your timing, seeing, which festivals have restrictions that you might want to be mindful of before you, start submitting to streaming platforms and all of that. And that's just like another one of those like calendar projects. But I think that, ultimately really more and more filmmakers are striving for both in some way, shape or form, even if we're talking about at the end, just putting your film up on Vimeo and having that as, a public calling card somewhere that you can get eyes on. I think that, whatever form that ultimately takes, like it is useful to you. And now there's more options than ever to do that. So yeah. Sheryl?
Yeah, there's just the same, just as, as long as if you've got some, as long as you're, making sure that like, if you've got some like your heart set on some festivals, just making sure that you've read those rules before you kind of went out and, kind of put your film everywhere. I mean, that, yeah, like there's, as Amanda said, a lot of festivals aren't as precious as they used to be. As with Outfest, we're really about, we're very mission community oriented. So obviously, it matters, we try and look for new work. I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about was like looking for like those discovery festivals as opposed to those festivals that are more like best of. So if we're talking about filmmakers who are emerging, you really want to do your research around what festivals are discovery festivals and what festivals kind of just like play the best of, and both have a place in the landscape of film. But that's also something to be aware of as you're submitting. But yeah, I mean, I think there really isn't, as Ben said, that there's not an either or. You can kind of fit everything into your into the lifespan of your short, and even outside of kind of distribution, there's also like the educational route, there's like the cultural institution route, depending on what your film is about. There's like a whole landscape of things that you can do with your film that isn't just theatrical, that where you can kind of make money at the most, and at the least have it be seen by the the people that the communities that you really want to reach out to. And then there's this whole other discussion about like impact campaigns and kind of going on the road with your film, kind of with that in mind. So there's a whole slew of things that you can do to really kind of make the lifespan of your short film as robust as possible.
Well, thanks everyone for jumping on that last question. I just want to thank everyone for the filmmakers who are watching, and of course my wonderful panelists, Amanda, Bojana, Sheryl, for sharing your wonderful expertise. I'm sure there's so many more questions, and we try to answer as many from the audience, but we just had an hour and we try to get through as much as we can.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. I just want to thank Ritesh for moderating, and to all of our panelists and to our attendees. Thank you for coming. Really fantastic conversation. This is my least favorite part, where I have to like cut everyone off, because I feel like we could have probably just kept going for another hour probably, and with all the questions we had too. So really appreciate you guys all making the time. And for everyone to know later today, we have a short to feature Making the Leap at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So please feel free to tune in there. There's still time to register if you haven't. And so I hope everyone's enjoying day one of ShortFest. Thank you all so much for coming.